You can start whenever.
Okay. All right, so we just wanted to thank you to begin with for taking the time to meet with us and chat a little bit. So again, my name is Sarah and this is Danielle, and we're nice to meet you too, officially. We are both representatives of the digital community, but we're also UIT ambassadors. So back in November, as UIT ambassadors, Danielle and I went around campus to kind of interview students about their opinions on ONtechU. And we did this because her and I both were kind of indifferent about the change. We were open to it, but we kind of wanted to know what other students felt.
Sure.
For the large part, we got some strong opinions from people, but this was mostly before we explained to them the reasoning behind ONtechU.
So in talking to the students, we found a lot of them hadn't had the opportunity to go to the discussions. So Sarah and I are both aware, since we are ambassadors and we're part of the digital community, that we know what's going on campus, and we're privileged to be informed of the changes. But going around campus, it was clear that not everyone knew exactly what was going on.
Sure.
So our first question is, how did ONtechU come about?
Well, as you can imagine, so you know that I started in March, and so even before I started here, I think that the issue of UOIT and the acronym and how difficult it is to remember, to pronounce, to say, was actually an issue right in the search process. So it started well before I got here about the sort of need to rebrand and the understanding. And then when I got here and I spoke to the entire community, including students, staff, faculty, it's interesting because it's a classic change problem, right? So when you're talking to people, and I'm just talking to you, and I say, so tell me about your experiences at UOIT and what's it like to have to describe where you're at, etc. Then students are very open to saying, yeah, it does get clumsy to tell people where I'm at. And so when I did all of that, then at the end of that, I think the interesting part is when I begin to say, okay, now I'm putting together a plan because I've heard the whole community, and one of the things we have to tackle is our acronym. And of course, then you're going to have in a change management process people who say, well, no, we want to keep that. We love that. That's our identity, right? And so you have to go back to, okay, I know you love it's your identity, but everybody was in agreement that it's unbelievably difficult to say, remember, pronounce, what does it mean? So how do we get to somewhere that's positive? And I think that what I heard from people when I was talking about the acronym itself was that they wanted to keep, the words that were important for them to keep was that they wanted everybody to know that we were a university. They wanted to keep Ontario, and they wanted to keep technology or technological in the name. And so a way of stimulating that discussion was certainly to say to folks, what do you think about if you shorten form that it's Ontario, ONtechU has all those components, right? So I think I don't think that there's any perfect way to start a change process where you start telling people, let's get involved in how do we rebrand the acronym. I do think you're right that we had to come out after and be very clear, right? That because if you really think about it, it's kind of complex. The name isn't going to change. We're always going to be the University of Ontario Institute of Technology.
And I think some students had a bit of a misunderstanding about that at the beginning.
The name was changing, and what's on our degree, all of that stuff staying the same. And then what's really changing is, and it's the question for our whole community, does the UOIT acronym serve us or hinder us? Probably the answer is both. Does it hinder us more than it serves us? And if it does, what do we replace it with that the whole community feels comfortable with? And so ONtechU is kind of the first shot at saying, okay, so this is what I've heard. This may not be where we land, but what does the community think of it? So that's how we got to that point.
Okay. So you did kind of touch on this already. Did you expect the feedback that you got? What were you thinking?
You know what's interesting? When you're in a place, you're never sure kind of the things that are sacrosanct in the culture and the things that you aren't, right? And I think those are always interesting ones to think about. So for instance, as you'll know, I was making a number of changes out of the gate. So the library was going to be open 24 hours as soon as I came in. I came in March, so the first exams were in April last year. That was the first time for that, getting, Adirondack chairs out in front of the fountain, keeping the fountain open, making Polonsky Commons more attractive, talking about Sticky Campus. Even though for, some groups of students will laugh at Sticky Campus, the great thing is that it sticks with you, right? You remember what a Sticky Campus is. So I was kind of surprised that there wasn't as much backlash against any of those changes, that they just went through smoothly. And so I think when it came to ONtechU, I had underestimated how much that students who come here, of course, are going to feel invested in what UOIT means. And me saying to them logically, well, if you go stand at Yonge and Dundas and ask 99 people out of 100 what UOIT means, they'll have no idea. And that's actually a big problem for us for recruitment and for the advancement of our university. People would say, yeah, but I love it. I love being here. And so it's how do we give people the permission to say, we want you to love your university like we do. We get that you came to UOIT. So how do we preserve that love of the spirit of why you came while saying, okay, how can we move the acronym so that it serves us for the next 25 years? And that we're not in 10 years saying, oh, we thought it would catch on more than it has, right?
Yeah, it would make the change a little more difficult.
Yeah, it could make it a lot more difficult, right? And it is, our VP of External Relations, we used to have kind of an on-running joke in the sense of, we would go out to events that we even sponsored, and it was so bad that I was just saying to her, just once, I just need one MC or one, Master of Ceremonies to pronounce our name correctly. And it was the acronym, right? They just couldn't do it correctly. And you can imagine that you have rooms filled of business people, you have rooms filled with engineers, you have rooms filled with our community, and when that opportunity is lost, that's your only opportunity to say, can you please remember this? And I'd say that's the other interesting part, is how many people I've brought to the campus, like the people who have never seen the place before. Everybody, which you won't be surprised by, are blown away by who we are and what we're doing here. But when they get back to Toronto, they'll say to me, okay, so how do I promote you again? And if I try the UOIT, they say, forget it. I can't even remember that. And so that sort of spurred on that we have to be common sense about, we have to give people something that all of us can pronounce, all of us are proud of, and we can move forward with.
And I think us learning a little bit more about that through watching your discussions with the students and faculty, we came to understand that a little bit more. I just think some students are having a harder time with it because they've spent so much time, if they're a fourth-year student, they've spent so much time trying to come, they've experienced that as well, but trying to promote UIT to their family and friends and other people. So it's hard for them to now.
And alumni,
change.
right? Alumni find it tough too, and I find that when I meet with alumni, the difference I find though is alumni do have, the reality is they've been out in the working world a little more, so they've got a bit of life maturity that at least if you can walk them through the logic, that what I've found alumni say to me is, just as long as you're continuing to make my alma mater stronger and my degree worth more every day, and when I come back to campus I'm more proud than I was, then do what you have to do, right? And I think that's, you can walk them through the logic of why UOIT was somewhere you were proud of and somewhere we can all be, but it's probably not the right acronym for the next 25 years.
So going back to the acronym of ONtechU, we've watched your discussions, and we know that you said in a discussion when you're rebranding, you often don't go with the first choice. So that led us to wonder if ONtechU was your first choice.
Well, I don't know if it was a first choice. I mean, I think when I was talking to people, as you can imagine, I probably heard, a whole myriad of possibilities of what you could use. I thought that it was one at least that it was a good example because it had all the components in it. And then people could say and pick and choose as we go forward. Like it had Ontario in it, it had tech in it, and it had the U for university. So I was trying to say to people kind of, I heard you on this. And then if we decide to deviate and then go with an Ontario Tech or, other, that's up to the community to decide then, right? To say, okay, the president took a shot at this, but now he's saying, he's listened to the community and they say we would rather go with something else. Then that's a collective decision. But I do think my experience has been, whether it's branding or any other change, is that you have to have at least one straw thing for people to shoot at, right? It's impossible to have an abstract discussion around UOIT. So a lot of people say to me, well, should you have put out that tweet, et cetera, et cetera? Well, it got us talking, right? And it got us talking pretty quickly. There are negative sides to that, there are positive sides, but I think we had to have the discussion. And I think it's accelerated the discussion, which is a good thing to have. Because I think the complacency that I could hear from some people since people realized, oh, we made the change from telling him there's real problems with UOIT to he's doing something about it, right? That change management flip. When people realize that, I think people get defensive and start saying, the whole UOIT forever, and this is the best name ever, and there's parts of that we really, as I said, we have to nurture, because people love, and then you have to ask them, what do you love about it, right? It's never the acronym, it's the community that they're a part of. So it's interesting that therefore you have to give people something that they can poke at and say, well, give me an alternative, because you can't just have an abstract discussion saying we could be something else and never give somebody something to think about. So I do think it will end up in a better place from having started.
It's kind of about starting the discussion.
And I really didn't know at the time if the community would say, yeah, you've hit it. That sounds like us, right? Because it's interesting. Kathy and I, we were talking to a group last night from education who took ONtechU as part of their group project in communication to brand it, and some really cool branding came out of what they did. So it's not like you couldn't use it, but that has to be something that as a community we collectively decide, right? And I think then people feel a bigger sense of buy-in. But I don't think we should ever think in a place that has 10,000 students, because you know the reality of the undergraduate experience, right? There's a portion of the population that just isn't always aware of what's going on. So you're never going to have complete buy-in, but to the extent possible, you want to make the community aware of what's going on, why is it going on, what are the options, and what do you think about them? And if you can give forum for those people to be able to express those, which we're going to continue to do in January and February, I think that will lead to a better place. But my point being, it doesn't matter what we'll come up with, there will be resistance, right? Because even staying the same, there's resistance.
That's true. So you mentioned how when you introduced ONtechU, it was over Twitter. How do you feel that social media plays a role in building relationships with the community, and how do you use social media to connect with students? Yeah, well, as you guys know, social media is a double-edged sword, right? Yes. So you've got the positive and then you've got the negative, and they can be, so different. So I think if you've looked at my social media account, I try to use it completely for positive. I stay out of any of the negative spiral of social media. So I use it to promote the school, to promote our students, to promote what people have been doing. I think that's really important. So, to the extent that my job is always to promote that this is a fabulous university, people don't know what we're doing here, and it's a gem that story needs to be told. I do need more than a Twitter handle, right? What we're talking about is a rebrand around a collective sense of identity, and how you move that forward, so that if I am in downtown Toronto or in downtown Vancouver, I'm saying to people about something that they can then latch on to in a couple of short words or whatever that sticks. Something that they never forget, right? That's a place that's on the move. And to me, we've succeeded once we've done that, where our internal community feels as though it speaks to who we are, and the external community can say, I can remember that, and that's cool things that you guys are doing. Right? That's the goal. Do you feel that there's anything you could have done differently when
Oh, there's always ways to do it differently, right? I think that, so you can have communications folks telling you a million different things. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually think that when you orchestrate change at too much, people feel like they're being orchestrated, right?
Mhm.
So if you have sort of focus group after focus group, and then at the end of the day you say, oh, I've heard everything, and now it's ONtechU, that's a little manufactured. So I would rather, people say, well, really, did you really want the backlash? Well, it got people really involved who may not have been involved in what should our name be, who are we, what do we want to be in the future. I'm just trying to think of ways to have that discussion with students that wouldn't be that, and I couldn't come up with any, right? It's really, you gotta fixate people's minds on collective identity. So could I have done things differently? For sure. But I think that the point is that it ended up giving us something to talk about and to shoot arrows at, to say, if it's not this, let's make it something better.
Yeah.
So at some point, I would have come out with saying, this is where we're at this point, and then I think there would have been backlash anyway. So it's really, the honest answer is, at what point do you want the feedback, right, from the community? And my answer is, I want it all the way along, right, so that people realize that, I really don't have a horse in the race, other than that my job is to make sure people know the university.
Yeah.
So that I have to keep pushing people to say, I get why people love UOIT, and I get why we need something different. And that's my job, to be able to say, if I really thought that I could succeed in selling UOIT and saying UOIT everywhere I was, I would say to people. But when people that I trust from around the world say to me, what are you doing with that acronym? How is that not the first thing to go? I have to relay it to our community and say, people keep saying it's a no-brainer. Why are we tripping ourselves over this, right? And that's just an honest piece of the feedback at 9 months from what I've heard outside the community as much as what I've heard inside the community.
So looking towards the future, I
Yeah.
guess what we're as students dying to know is if
What are the next steps? Or
what if ONtechU is staying the moniker, or if you're going to drop another hashtag?
Well, I don't think I would drop another hashtag. I think that I've been frank enough with you to say that I don't think I would do it that way. But I think that, that I would want students involved in saying, so is ONtechU the way to go? Is, the other ones we've heard, which if you've heard those videos, you've heard, probably that one of the leaders is Ontario Tech. Which ones do we think of? And I think at this point, we have to get to a point where we start introducing some visual representations, because to just use, typeface and say hashtag ONtechU or hashtag Ontario Tech, you really have to start showing people what would that look like on a varsity jersey, what would that look like on social media, what would that look like if you're presenting at a conference and you're, so I think we're now reaching the stage where we have to come up with options and choices and real looks. And not saying that those can't change and people won't shoot at those, because they will. They'll shoot at everything. That's just part of change. But I think that's more tangible for people to say, okay, if you were going to fully mock this up. Whereas ONtechU is more to get the discussion going of, is this even in the right ballpark, right? Does this work?
I know you mentioned that some of the varsity teams are pushing for wanting something on their jerseys.
But I mean, there's other stakeholders pushing in different directions.
Yeah.
So my job is to kind of keep everybody moving and not let anybody get too far ahead of the game, because then you can have a bigger backlash that, I didn't think there was a decision yet, and our teams are wearing, so we don't want that. So I do think we want to keep, as many people involved for as long as we can, but also realizing that, this isn't the kind of thing that you can come to a university consensus over, right? There's just no magical formula for saying, A, what do we think is the best, and B, does it market test, right? Because at the end of the day, we can all think we're marketers, but we have to go with data that says, if you go with this, our students are saying it's attractive, parents are saying it's attractive, employers are saying it's attractive. A whole range of stakeholders have to buy into it. And so the first stakeholder and most important is our internal community, but it has to work for the other stakeholders as well.
And do you have a timeline of when we might be seeing changes?
You know, I'm less burdened by a timeline than about people feeling like they've really had a chance to chat and get their input heard. So I'd like to wrap it up early in the new year. I'd like to spend January and February. But if we get to a point at the end of January, at the end of February, where people still feel like they haven't been heard, I hope we have enough, different town halls, and we'll have to mix them up too, because I'm not sure town halls are always the best. But different ways, like people will be allowed to give input on the web, through different forums to try to reach out to more students, right? Because not everybody can come. And then to sort of present, okay, this is what we've heard, and this is what we've mocked up, right? And leave that for the community to be able to comment on, with me hearing like what the points are, to say, are there things that we can do better? Are people repulsed by one, right? Which is really important to know. And then actually making a decision. And sometimes people minimize how important it is in these times to get on with it at some point, right? Because we could really spend a couple of years talking about this, but the opportunity cost would be huge, because all of those marketing, everything that we're doing is on hold pending, how do we get UOIT redone?
Well, we'll look forward to seeing the changes in the upcoming year. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for being ambassadors, because that's so crucial to our whole university. So I see you all the time at everything you do, from our open houses to absolutely. It's really important. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
Good. Well done.